way. I started a file in FF1, and I didn't get far, and then I started a file in FF2, and kind of wanted to murder my disk, so I quit FF2.
Yeah, FF2 has a very controversial combat system.
Yeah.
By controversial, I mean most people hate it.
I mean, to be fair, it's
I think it does what it's supposed to do, but it is unfun.
Yeah, it's like, it's a good idea done.
Yeah, I was like, I appreciate, like, this is old times, like, I appreciate them going with a different direction for this game, and I think that their idea was really clever and neat. And it works out, actually, which is weird, but it is not actually very fun.
You told me once, what is FF2's battle system?
Oh god.
Imagine if Elder Scrolls 4 leveling system was worse.
Well, I am so glad you used that example because I still have no godforsaken idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll let him explain it.
Josh, did you ever play Classic WoW?
Let Matt explain it. He's usually good at explaining things to me.
I have a good analogy. Did you ever play Classic WoW?
No!
Oh, then never mind.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so
Shut
no.
the hell up!
It's a very simple explanation if you have the proper context.
And so far, I don't. Matt, please carry on.
Okay. So the way it works, and it sounds pretty simple in concept, and it does work out, is everything your characters do makes them better at that thing, right? And that sounds reasonable until you start thinking about it more. So like, if you punch a dude, you get better at punching dudes. If you stab a dude, you get better at stabbing dudes. Using bows and arrows, you get better at using bows and arrows. Using magic, you get better at that magic, and you also get better at magic in general. Where it starts getting bad is when you start thinking about defensively. The way to get defense is getting punched in the fucking face a lot.
Oh!
The way to get magic resistance is to get obliterated by spells a lot. The way to get HP is to just get fucking murdered a lot. It's like... Oh, it's like, this makes sense and makes everyone end up being, like, reasonable. Like, oh, the guy who's, like, in the front, who's tanking all the shit and punching everyone, he ends up being, like, a big tank dude. And you're like, oh, that makes sense. And the person in the back ends up having fucking 0 goddamn HP and fucking uses bows. And it's like, well, I mean, all this stuff makes sense and it works out, but when you get to a part where you're like, oh, fuck, I'm stuck, I need to grind for levels, and it's like, oh, you can't just, like, beat the monsters, you need more HP. You need to stand there and get fucking wailed on for a while. And you're like, oh, this is really unfun to just stand here and get punched in the face repetitively until I'm better at taking hits. And that's how the combat system works in that game.
Yeah, it's a good idea to have your characters level up with what they do. You know, that's awesome. Yeah,
it makes total sense and it works out exactly the way you think it would. It's just that it's really unfun if you need defense, HP, or magic resist at a point in the game.
Yeah.
Especially magic resist, because you're like, ah, god, I can't choose who that fucking mage is gonna throw spells at. And it's like, they pretty much always throw it at the back line, but then it's like, oh, now I gotta put my fucking beefy guys in the back and my archers in the front. It's like, hope I run into a thing that knows magic. It's like, oh god.
Matt, do you know the most infamous way to abuse the shit out of that game's leveling system?
I know how to get maximum level masteries instantly, if that's what you're asking about.
I'm very curious about this after I mention the method that I'm talking about.
Well, then you can put them in your piggy bank, buddy.
Basically what you do is you go to one of the weakest sets of enemies in the game, and then you just beat the shit out of yourself in order to gain defensive stuff.
Yes, this is very similar to how to max weapons immediately.
How do you do that immediately?
Well, it's not immediate, it takes a long time, but it doesn't require any effort because you can hold down the fucking A button for like an hour and then come back and finish it. But
take down your fucking controller.
So you do. That is exactly what you do at one point. But first, you have to equip all your party with dual-wielded shields, so they can do no damage when they attack. Then you hold down the fucking A button and walk away, so that they just non-stop keep punching these gremlins for 0 damage. They shouldn't die because they're fighting like the worst enemies ever, and they got 2 fucking shields, so they're pretty tanky. Then when you assume you've done it long enough, you come back, you equip them with the weapons you actually want experience in, and then you fucking kill the gremlins, and the game only registers that it only registers what happened at the end, and it's like, oh, you made 8 million attacks, and you had a spear. So you got 8 million spear XP. It's like, thanks, game. It's very good if you can't use an item yet, and you're like, shit, I really want to use this legendary lance, but my guy has no levels in lances.
Abusing that game engine.
FF2 is not a good game.
The FF2 remake has a secondary mode as well, which is super painful. Because, no, if you thought FF2's main game was unfun, you need to play the fucking added content in the Game Boy Advance version.
Oh god.
The added content of FF2 is that you get to play with all of the characters who died in the game. Like, story-wise died, like, you know how, like, Aerith dies in FF7 or something.
Right.
So...
Spoilers!
Oh man, I'm sorry!
Everyone watching is like, God, man!
Shit, I've ruined the game you're playing! This, like, 20-year-old game is ruined! But, yeah, so... Basically, you play with all the characters that died throughout the game. That sounds okay, right?
Yeah.
The white mage that dies at, like, level 2. And the game starts at, like, level 60.
Jesus!
Because it starts at, like, the level the latest guy died, who was, like, level 60 when he died. So the characters you start with are, like, level 2, level 20, level 40, and level 60.
Oh my
You're like,
god.
I'm sure glad my healer's level 2! Like, I'm gonna have fun grinding this for 20 hours to catch this motherfucker up! He dies in one hit to literally everything! Oh man, this sucks!
Yeah, sounds like it sucks.
It's so hard to get him XP too, because he literally just dies instantly every time you get into a battle. It's like, fuck. It's so hard to catch him up, and you need to catch him up because he's the fucking white mage! You're like, no!
Pretty important.
If it would have been one of the warriors, you could have just been like, yeah, whatever. I'll just be down a fighter the whole game. It's like, no, the only guy who can heal is level 2. He's technically a white wizard. And I think he's a little higher than level 2, but he's dramatically lower level than the other characters. Because he dies in the first chapter of the game in a cave-in or something.
God.
He's like, oh no, the cave's collapsing! And he like pushes your party out, and then he just gets fucking crushed by rocks.
Ouch.
And to be fair, he was way stronger than your party at that time, but way stronger than you when you're like, you know, the very first level of the game is not very strong.
Yeah. Oh my god.
I also had to restart that game more than once because I misunderstood how the magic system worked. I cannot explain how it works because I don't remember, and I'll probably fuck it up if I played it again. But there was a specific way you had to use, like, spell books. There were, like, 2 ways you could use a spell book. And one way was you made your mage cast the spell, and the other way was you just used the book. And you really needed to not do that one ever! At least in the beginning of the game. And I fucked that up immediately because I didn't know there were 2 ways to use it. I used it, and I was like, my magic's gone. And there's no way to get that spell again until later in the game, because you're right in the beginning of the game, there's no shops that sell magic yet. So if you use your magic tome, you just can't use magic, and the first boss can only be hurt by magic.
Oh my god, that game is
It's
not good.
like, why did you do this? He can be hurt by other things, but he takes like 1 to 5 damage, and he has hundreds of HP. But it's like, you will not defeat this man if you do not use magic. He dies like pretty much instantly if you use magic. He's basically meant to be the tutorial to use magic, but the game doesn't... It's too old a game, and there's no real tutorial, and they don't tell you, like, hey, by the way, one of these 2 buttons makes your character use the spell, which, like, teaches it to them, and the other one makes them use the spell, which uses a far stronger version of the spell, and then deletes the magic from your inventory. It's like, no, you need to teach them the magic. so that they can keep using it. And it's like, fuck, I wish the game gave me some hint with this. Maybe it did, but like, I fucking didn't catch it if it did. I was a lot younger as well, so...
Yeah.
And like, Final Fantasy 1 didn't do that shit, because I played Final Fantasy 1 first, and it did... That was definitely not how it worked in Final Fantasy 1. You learned to spell in Final Fantasy 1, you learned the spell. That was it.
I was actually looking at Final Fantasy 1. I talked with Duck about it a little bit, but I was looking back at the history of Final Fantasy, and the original FF is a lot more tabletop RPG inspired than the rest of the series.
Yeah. Probably because back then, the only JRPG that had existed before it, I think, was Dragon Quest.
Yeah.
And all the earlier RPGs that were probably, like, made before that, like, and Dragon Quest was probably finished while Final Fantasy was also probably in development, I'd imagine. They might have finished it real quick, I don't know. But they released within, like, a year of each other, and Dragon Quest was first. But before then, it was, like, Baldur's Gate. So... like, those games. And I guess, like, Ultima was probably around then, too, I think.
Yeah.
Definitely Ultima.
But yeah, I think it was like Ultima and Baldur's Gate, and then it was like Dragon Quest was like the first JRPG that was popular, and then Final Fantasy came out. In Final Fantasy, the original one, not the port, you can only save if you have a tent, I believe. Which is an item that you have to use.
Yes.
Yep. I remember that.
They changed that in the port where you can just save whenever. Which doesn't lower the difficulty as much as you might think it would. Mostly because, like, when you use a tent, it, like, full heals you and everything. When you save the game, it doesn't do shit. So,
Yeah.
The only difference is that if you save the game and you die, you go back to your save. So it saves you, like, time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make the game any easier, it just saves you a lot of fucking time if you die.
Makes sense. And by the way, just gonna point it out, because to finish the confusion, with Final Fantasy III on PSP, it actually has a physical release.
Is it Final Fantasy 3 or is it Final Fantasy 6?
3, like the
Okay, because I know all the numbers get fucked after 2.
at 2 actually.